Hi, and welcome. I'm Elliot Nelson, founder of HXWise, and my colleagues and I are delighted to work with you and your colleagues at L'Oreal to help improve the employee experience and to share with you this bootcamp on September 6th through 8th. I want to go through a couple of things to help you get ready for this in the next few weeks. So this is a bit of a preview and also a preparation or pre-work of some key concepts that will help you be ready so that we can focus on the 6th through the 8th on the workshop itself and working with our colleagues. So in this boot camp, some of the key outcomes that you're going to have, first of all, you'll come away with a much better understanding and practice of what is human-centered design, how it helps us to identify priorities and link to business impact, how it helps us to improve as we understand the human experience of work, how it helps us to work in cross-functional teams from listening to launch and respond to these business requirements that we identify, how it helps us to understand and get better insights, different insights and different techniques than we're used to using, and how to manage all those insights and priorities across a portfolio of a larger journey. And we'll also co-create with you as we go and make some decisions about what tools we want to have in your own L'Oreal HX Playbook and Toolkit, how to listen, how to co-create design, everything from start to finish. And we'll talk about your role as ambassadors, how to act as a sponsor or someone who is sponsoring change, how is someone who's leading change or doing the actual work with regard to employee experience or people experience at L'Oreal. All right. So in this presentation, we're going to talk about what is experience research and design and where did it come from? What's it based on? What's the business case out of all of this? And what is the actual playbook and toolkit? We'll get a first look at the components and elements of this. And why do we work in product teams? Why is this necessary? In the bootcamp, we're going to simulate working in product teams, which are small groups of people of everyone who represents the teams who are touching or impacting a particular experience or journey. We'll also talk finally about our agenda for the bootcamp, just to give you a preview of the 3 days we're going to spend together. So let's talk about what experience research and design is. And to really understand something, you need to know the origin story. Where did it come from? Certainly, human-centered design has been with us from the beginning of people on this planet. And if you go back to some of the ancient structures in the pyramids or some of the great cathedrals or other great structures that were built, a lot of times they would build scale models just to understand how people would use these and also give the construction teams, the different people who are building the scaffolding, who are contributing the construction materials, etc., an opportunity to see this from a scale perspective and be able to anticipate some of the challenges that they would have. If you go back to about 50, 60 years ago with computers, this really came into play with the computer age and with personal computers. Before our current time of having personal computers, if you wanted to operate a computer, you were a computer scientist. You had to understand computer programming, and computers occupied big rooms, and it was very challenging to operate. Then this all changed in 1984 or so with the introduction of the Macintosh and other PCs. But the Macintosh and its advertising promised something different, that having personal computers could open each of us up to more opportunities for creativity and for individual expression. And indeed, the tagline for the first Macintosh was the computer for the rest of us. Well, how did we get a PC or a Macintosh that was designed for the average consumer? That's the story of human-centered design. So you had people like this group that Steve Jobs brought over from Xerox PARC's lab, including Larry Tesler. Larry was someone who early on used to go out and interview the receptionist in the front desk at Xerox and say, how do you type a page? How do you make copies? How do you make corrections? So all the other problems that this person would have and other people that other than the receptionist. And out of this, he developed concepts like user-friendly, copy paste. And later on, he worked on the first browser and first laptops used on an airplane. First laptop used on an airplane was Larry Tesler. Alan Kay, Tim Mott, Susan Kerr, Stu Card. These were other members of this Apple team brought in by Steve Jobs from Xerox that used similar methods to understand the kinds of problems people were solving in the context they were and develop uh, different kinds of user testing. Susan Kerr was somebody who brought over her design genius from branding and graphics design. That's why the first Mac, the screen looked like a typed page instead of a black screen with a flashing browser or flashing cursor. So along the way, these people developed some really cool and important concepts and products that you see here. They also were founders or key members of some very progressive companies. Amazon with their online shopping, Pixar, Atari, and EA Sports, so in the gaming area, and also Walt Disney and Imagineering. So if you look at the roots of EX or HX, there are four main routes that we can identify. The first one is on a design level, and this is what we talked about starting with this computer for the rest of us and the team at Macintosh. Human-centered design came about with Don Norman, who was a friend and a colleague of many of these people in Silicon Valley in the mid 80s. So the idea that you would understand the context when people use things, understand their user requirements, design solutions for those requirements, and then test those against it. Service design is like a twin brother of design thinking. Service design really took root, especially in Europe, but has spread also to North America and other parts of the world. Works in very similar ways of research and design. Design thinking, many you've heard of, came out of this time and was found first in academic places like Stanford Design School and Hasso-Plattner in Germany, and with companies like IDEO. So these were in the 80s and 90s. Analytics developed along the way to give us better insights. So you see ideas like segmenting and developing personas, understanding people's attitudes about particular products, looking for patterns and predicting those patterns using machine learning. And people analytics has come about more recently in the last decade or so. Behavior and psychology is another branch. So you have psychology, the study of sociology, which is people in groups or in communities. Ethnographic research means we go out to where people are and study them in their home environment and in their natural context to understand problems to solve. Behavioral research, why do people, when they enter a store or a shop, go for product A versus product B? And then you had all the agile disciplines that came along. Kanban, which helped us with streamlining and making production more efficient. Lean and Scrum and Agile, which are ways of especially helping us to prototype and test. But you see again this circular iterative movement, and the emphasis is also on speed and failing fast and experimentation. Lastly, in the last 25, 30 years, we've seen a new discipline arise called user experience. So this was closely associated with all of this consumer tech. Customer experience came along about 10 years later using the same principles applied to customers. And then more recently, in the last 7 years or so, we see employee experience, or as we like to call it, the human experience of work. All right, so what is different on the research side of all of this? Why make all this effort to learn something new? Well, I think the key principle that I would like you to remember from all of this is that we want to identify the problems to solve and the right problems before we jump into solutions. I had a 25-year career leading the talent and OD functions of some large corporate entities in Europe and North America. Also worked for a Japanese enterprise, Fujitsu. And I'm as guilty as the next person in terms of jumping into solutioning before understanding problems to solve. So I wanted to bring to you what I've learned about the value of all of this and how this helps us to not just improve experiences, but to drive business impact. These are some examples of the type of research, and you notice both quantitative and qualitative that we're going to learn. I think we're much more familiar and used to using quantitative methods, but we'll talk about when to use a qualitative method versus a quantitative method. And the idea that we do triangulation. Triangulation means to get to accuracy and validity and to overcome bias, we like to use three methods. And three different types of methods, three different types of data, and also more than one of us doing the research. So overcoming the personal biases. On the product development side, what's different is we like to test solutions before we launch something to an entire organization. So this is also something that I did not do that I find extremely valuable that I want to share with all of you. So here's some examples of prototypes and how we test a journey. So once we do a current state map, we can look at the future state map, building on the priorities and problems to solve that we've identified. Another type of prototyping is doing a desktop walkthrough where we create a desktop model that involves the people, the processes, the systems, and how they all interact together to make sure that we're doing things in the most effective way and meeting users' needs. If it's a technological solution, we can build a wireframe or a dummy. We can build a physical prototype. So here's an example of building a cardboard bus stop so that somebody could walk inside, sit in it, see what it's like, and understand some of the functionality. Here's a picture of something our partners did with Lufthansa a few years ago, where they simulated a whole overseas flight, complete with all the seating, the cabin experience, the passengers, the service, everything. And we can also use maps in this context for prototyping, like a business model canvas. So one of the key things to take away here is that prototyping is really underrated. Ideas are cheap. I think we all know how to do ideation at a certain level. We don't do nearly enough prototyping and testing. So how does all of this help us? I think it's really important to understand this as we talk about in a few moments the business value or business impact of all this. First of all, it helps us to prioritize our investment. And in any cycle, but especially now, we're really concerned about making sure that our people and our financial investments are in the right places. We don't do that effectively in human resources until now. We also want to be able to show, and this helps us to do this, to link to the business and to customer experience. Most of you will probably agree with me when I say that most customer pain points originate in an employee pain point somewhere. I've mentioned risk a few times. In the way we do research and the way we do testing, we really want to reduce risk. And this helps us to do that. It also helps us, as I mentioned, working in cross-functional teams to collaborate. We set up these artificial boundaries and think that we in HR are responsible for the entire employee experience. And this is not the case. And this way of working that we will learn in the bootcamp will help us to understand different ways we can approach that. And one of the main things that helps us to do is enable people, as we improve their experiences, to enable them to do their best work. So along with this, what's the business case? Let me give you a simple example of where we are with the experience economy. If you want to make a cup of coffee and you want to grind your own beans and make that, it'll probably cost you 30 cents. If you want to go to a cafe and enjoy this, it'll probably cost you $1.50. If you want to go to a nicer cafe, maybe artisanal coffee and good service, you're willing to pay double. We're already at 10 times the original value of that commodity. Now think about what we do in HR. Are we producing and developing commodities, or are we developing experiences? Which end of this spectrum is going to drive highest value, highest commitment and productivity of people, and highest and best results for our business? If we go to a coffee shop, a nicer one with baristas that can mix us a nice coffee, we've got leather chairs, good friends, maybe some great music, we're willing to pay $7. So look where we've come on this spectrum. And that's what we see in the experience economy, that to drive competitive advantage, this is where companies are going for. So we see some very tangible financial results. This is report from both McKinsey and Forrester from a few years ago, looking at some of the increased value that you see in different categories with return on spend, brand awareness, customer satisfaction, employee satisfaction, and how companies who focus on CX, customer experience, outperform their competitive set in the S&P over an entire decade by over 2 to 1. EX-centric companies. Here's another study that looked at employee growth, pay, average revenue, profit, revenue per employee, profit per employee. We see significant improvements in companies who focus on experience. So again, if these are the outcomes of all of this, our ultimate goal as we improve experience is really profit and competitive advantage for L'Oreal. All right, so let's dive a little bit into the playbook, and I want to give you some key concepts so we don't have to repeat these necessarily in the boot camp, but we can really do some of the activities together in using the tools. But there are a few foundational things that you need to understand, and hopefully you're a little curious after this first part of our presentation about what all this really is. And I think the easiest way to think about this is there are 3 main iterative stages, and we use the word iterative very literally here because we can repeat these things multiple times. There's no end to this. You've all heard of the concept of continuous improvement, but this is one place where it's practiced. In the first stage is where we bring the people together who are part of that product team. So all the people who touch a particular journey or experience. We look at existing data, we gather new data, we make a data strategy, how we're going to listen, and listen as a team, listen as a product team, and we start to structure the information that we get. And the end goal of all of this in this stage is we want to create personas and understand how those personas are currently using our product and their preferences and their patterns and the understanding why they do what they do. In the second stage is where we go a little bit further and organize this in chronological stories or narratives, what we call a journey or an experience map. So when somebody begins to research the product or service that we've developed, how are they coming into that system, becoming aware? When do they first acquire it and come into interaction with it? So if we're talking about a cross-boarding journey, when are they first starting to talk about a new experience, new development, new growth, and where do they want to go next in L'Oreal? So how they do the research, who they talk to, and later on as they start with the experience in the new role and how it goes forward from there. And we want to understand the context, the pain points, and the emotions, the problems that they're trying to solve at each stage, even holistically looking at others that they're with, including their family. So, and we also will map how well we are supporting them in our product team. What are the actions that we're taking to support or not support them at some very critical moments? So gathering this picture, identifying the priorities, what are the moments that matter? A moment that matters, and I think this is important to know, is a particular interaction. It's a specific interaction people have with us, rather than a longer time, but a very specific point in time. And it's a moment that is something that is rather significant in how it changes how they feel about our organization, how they feel about L'Oreal. How it may change their feeling of commitment, positive or negative. That's a moment that matters. And then in the third stage, what we're doing is that we're taking forward as priorities those key moments, the ones that have highest value, highest risk, highest opportunity, and we're taking those forward first into a product pipeline and saying, let's develop a new product and let's build that out and test it as a prototype and even pitch it to the end users as a way to be sure that we have the right ideas. So these same 3 stages make up our playbook. You see these same things here. These are called diamonds. These shapes here with the arrows means that at the beginning of the diamond, we're opening up to take in new information or insights. And then on the back end of the diamond It means we're making decisions and conclusions and being able to advance our work. We may do an iteration here and come back to do research, but the idea of this is that as we go through, we're continuously improving. In the middle stage, we're mapping the experiences and the moments that matter. And in the third stage, we're doing the ideation, the prototyping, and the testing. For the boot camp, we will take a very specific moment in time, probably 1 week of crossboarding, just to make it manageable and practical for us to study. And we'll bring in some actual colleagues in this middle phase, and we'll do a collaborative workshop to map their current experience in the first week of their new assignment and talk about that. And then we'll have them back as we do the prototyping and testing. Some of them will return to hear a pitch from us on a new product for how we will address this with our what we call a minimum viable product. So again, the idea is we want to get something out quickly to them and be able to test that. All right, so just a little bit more information, detail about what is underpinning this playbook. You've heard me talk about human-centered design. So the goal in human-centered design is to make sure we're identifying the right problems and to take the perspective of the end user. How does it feel to use my products, to go through this experience? So we want to have empathy as a goal and make sure we're identifying the right problem. You might hear of terms like design thinking, user experience, service design. All of these work in very similar fashion. And secondly, a second pillar is analytics. And remember, we talked about both qualitative and quantitative. Our goal here is to discover insights. We want to understand why people do what they do. That's a very critical insight. And we want to be able to segment people. They're different users at different reasons why they do what they do. So we want to understand that. And then thirdly, we want to work, as we said, in product teams. The goal there is to listen as a whole team rather than isolated within our HR silo, and then quickly ideate and prototype these new solutions. So this is a quick list of some of the tools and methods that we'll learn through the bootcamp. I will introduce these in about 5 or 10 minutes, and then we'll jump into some practice and use of these in some real life tests. So we'll be able to go through all of this together in the bootcamp. The main goal to remember isn't that we must use all the tools and every time we research or design a journey, but rather to be familiar with what's in the toolkit so that we can pull out the things that we need and do effective research and testing. Our goal is to improve the experience and to drive business impact, not to use all of the tools every time. And as I mentioned, as a result of the bootcamp, you will get your own playbook and toolkit with some facilitation guides for each one of these. So just a little bit more about product teams. A product owner is somebody who helps leads move the team through with decisions, make sure that things are followed, that the priorities that we identified earlier are followed through. Product team is anyone who touches a particular journey. It can be both digital and non-digital. It can be HR or non-HR. So example, in an onboarding product team, it could be somebody who has office and facilities, maybe real estate or communications, somebody from IT, a talent acquisition head, digital. So you can see there's some non-HR people who are mixed with this. Often we're seeing in companies who are practicing this that the leads of these teams are not HR. So it doesn't always have to follow that HR takes the lead in this. In fact, it's often rare. So how do we identify who belongs on our cross-boarding product team? Well, let's look at who's a stakeholder or a sponsor, who designs and manages web content, who gathers data and insights, who runs company programs for mobility and job rotations, who manages third parties, who communicates with people moving, who provides facilities or equipment for the home or the office, who trains or provides training or tips for managers of these people, or it could be anyone else. So these are some examples to help you think about when you come to form your own product teams um, in future journey design who would be in part of this. So this is what we'll simulate in our boot camp. So in day one of the boot camp, we'll tackle the first diamond. This is all about research, and you're welcome to bring any existing data that you have about crossboarding, and we'll learn how to organize and structure this. We'll create a research wall and some stakeholder maps and personas by the end of that day. Day two, we'll bring in real colleagues, listen to them talk about their crossboarding experience. In day one, we'll develop some interview guides together and practice this. Day two, we'll enact it with real colleagues. So, and we'll create the journey map, the as-is map for people, along with all the priorities and moments that matter. Day three, we'll develop and test a prototype for each team based on the priorities that we've identified. And then we'll pitch our new product to the end users, to these colleagues again, as our minimum viable product, our MVP. So the boot camp will be day one, 9 to 4, September 6th. Day two, we'll have a shortened day, 9 to 12:30. And day three on Diamond 3 will be from 9 to 4. We really look forward to seeing you, and I thank you for your support and activity in this boot camp. We're really excited to work with you.